working from their COC, giving support to the astronauts that are forward. So, how do you get there if you wanted to? This is a rough overview, noting that there's a lot of ways to Rome. No one's path, and you're going to hear from these two flight surgeons that no path is identical. This doesn't also take into account physician's assistants or nurse practitioners. This is strictly for physicians who want to get into flight surgery, which is our kind of slang term for aerospace medicine. It's a British term. You start in medical school, MD or DO. I talked to some of the pre-meds at UNF here in their club, but you want to get there to work, but it's still fun. On the civilian path, after medical school, you do a residency in emergency medicine, internal medicine, or family medicine. Now these are fields that are very well-rounded. They can handle a lot of different things. They're just designed by this. In our new medical world here on Earth, people hyper-specialize and go into fellowships. But in aerospace medicine, you have to be ready for whatever might happen. These residencies provide that foundation. After which, there are 2 civilian fellowships that exist. And I'm not just selling Mayo on it, but one of them is up north at Rochester in Minnesota. The other one's at UTMB. We have a graduate of that one here with us today. And after that, you can be a flight surgeon and get hired by the private or public sector. The military route, you do an intern year. That intern year can either be through a military hospital or it can be through a civilian hospital, but you just do that first year. And then you go to flight surgery training in Pensacola, Florida. Great state, all right? It's about a year long. You get your flight wings, you can fly, you learn how to take care of pilots and astronauts. They get sick too, believe it or not. And then unique to the United States Navy, I understand, is a new aerospace medicine specific residency. Now the reality of this is they grab people from any part of these pipelines and they pull them to work because the need is so great. So some people, they may not actually get their flight wings. They'll just go straight from intern year and go to start taking care of pilots immediately. That's still 5 years of training before they do that, so it's still quite a haul. Also worth mentioning is the NASA summer internship. While it holds no official place in either pipeline, it's looked at very highly. Astronauts often do it. It's a summer internship. It's not incredibly long. It's a month-esque. But flight surgeons do it too. So it could fit in either one of those. So that's how you get there from here. A little bit of lag. There we go. Stats from Zippia. The field is growing. As commercial aerospace flight and NASA's demands increase, the demands increase for this type of person, which is a person who's usually willing to do things at great altitudes and be a jack of all trades, master of none, some say. It's considered a primary care field. And on the right here are sort of the, I guess, career trajectories, you might say. And I'll be eager to hear what Dr. Harrison has to say about that. That first column, you serve in your role as a flight surgeon, as the staff physician, Bones and Star Trek, you're there with the people doing your thing. But you see quickly as you advance into a more senior career, 5, 8, 10 years later, you can become a medical director. Leadership positions are often favorable to flight surgeons because you've dealt with such a wide range of medicine. You're not hyper-focused into one thing. High in demand right now. So I wanted to talk about a couple things on this picture-filled slide. And rest assured, I'm not trying to do death by PowerPoint tonight. All of us have a lot of pictures for you to look at. Some think aerospace medicine's kind of lofty, but I would challenge you with that better aerospace medicine equals better terrestrial medicine. A very obvious way that this happened is, as I briefed earlier, flight surgeons are often talking to people through comms and walking them through dangerous things. That middle top one is a brief I gave to Dr. Hewitt's club once about a venous thrombosis that happened really far away, up near the moon, and they were able to walk them through it. Well, that model of care, doing things remotely, can anybody think of in the last couple years what has increased in frequency? A lot of our techniques got used, and you'd say, well, that's easy. Well, if you try to see a doctor through Zoom, you tell me how easy it is, right? But We built some of those standard operating procedures. Mr. Connor and his crew up here in the top right, they did the first all-civilian flight to the ISS in April of last year, okay? Super cool. All 4 gentlemen there from different countries, all private. Axiom's a nice company. Their goal was, I'm gonna teach you a term, maybe you know it already, don't want to insult anybody's intelligence, senescence, the death of cells, the death of an organism. It's something we study a lot in medicine. People age normally, so cells die, and as the copy machine keeps working, we get older. Sometimes exposure to radiation causes premature death of cells. Sometimes genetic disorders cause premature death of cells. Well, what they did was they took a lot of lab samples with them, working with Dr. Kirkland at the Mayo Clinic Center for Aging, brought them back down to Earth, and we're now studying what that 10-day duration mission has on those cells. And with all due respect to Mr. Connor and his crew, you might notice that they're a little older than the Hollywood actor astronaut, right? That was deliberately done. They're a little older, so they're using themselves as how will this have affected their aging. In case it hasn't been said in other briefs, or it's not covered in my flight surgeon's briefs, space travel has a heck of a impact on the human body, from the spine to the aging of your cells to disequilibrium for the rest of your life. The heart is meant to beat under 9.8 meters per second of gravity, not in no gravity at all. So a lot of weird things can happen. They're using themselves for that. And they take all that good tools, they bring it back to the little flight surgeons down here in the Air National Guard, and everybody benefits. I think that's what I wanted to say about that. So hopefully that all made sense. And if I don't have any questions, I'll just leave you with this before I hand it over. This type of study on how human beings can survive for duration in space is going to be really important if we're ever going to take that long-haul trip to a place like, oh, say, Mars, right? This is going to be important for us to do that. I'd like to hand it over now to my friend and mentor, Lee Spiker. We're going to end my slideshow and start yours.
Great, thank you. Yeah, what we'll maybe do is just do questions at the end, because this might be new for some people, and yeah, we're here to answer those questions you have. So I'm just going to show a lot of pictures about what I've lived in aerospace medicine and I've been lucky enough to be exposed to. Kind of a joke going around is that if you ever specialize in aerospace medicine, you'll never have a midlife crisis, and that's because you get to have so many adventures. So I'm just going to show you some of the cool stuff I've got to do in my career. And I'll just start with this picture and just like a little Cessna, but I was so lucky I got to be exposed to aviation at a young age. So I grew up flying and I got my pilot's license at 16. I got my pilot's license at 17. And so it kind of put me on the road to even consider this. And maybe this will be the talk where some of you might even consider something that interacts with this. So yeah, let me just show you a little bit about what aerospace medicine is as we go. So this is just a picture of Mayo from the sky and our overview. This is, like you said, it's a residency. It's regulated and you can be board certified in it. It's under the preventive medicine umbrella. Under that is general prev med, aerospace med, and occupational med. And so the whole idea is to try to keep people healthy. And it's often keeping people healthy in an unhealthy environment. So just aerospace medicine, it really started at the advent of powered flight, and then it grew by leaps and bounds, unfortunately, during wartime. Back in World War I, they would put all the unfit infantrymen into planes that couldn't, like, see, for example. So it didn't really go well, and that's why we developed some medical standards. Oh, and then this is a good graph of what I'm saying. So the whole idea over time is that we've always really selected for who goes into space. All the NASA astronauts are all medically screened and then they're watched for their lifetimes. So we've always said it's a normal physiology in an abnormal environment, but with the dawn of commercial spaceflight, it's those older gentlemen you saw there that maybe have made a lot of money and can't afford to go. So there's gonna be all kinds of medical pathology going into space now. Aerospace physiology involves all these systems. So this is why Morgan is saying how it can be so broad. You can have all sorts of doctors from all different specialties involved in aerospace medicine. So huge list there that can affect you. And then just how you're thinking through. So this is just how like a normal doctor works in their clinic. Someone comes in sick, you try to diagnose them, treat them, and you make a prognosis like, okay, it's the flu, you're gonna recover completely, for example. But in aerospace, you're really thinking about how they're gonna perform in an operational environment. And so it's a little different shift to just treating one medical problem. It's making sure that they're gonna have the best outcome. And especially when you think of the military, it has to be done at very specific times and high stress as well. So what is an aerospace medicine practitioner? Kind of what we're trying to tell you. I like this term. It's someone who addresses the needs of all who work, recreate, and travel in air, sea, and space. So it's pretty broad, but it's a lot of adventurous, you know, that we're keeping healthy. And then you're uniquely equipped to help make decisions about who can fly and how to mitigate risk and keep them to complete their mission. There's lots of different types of practitioners involved, and luckily I've gotten to kind of touch this through my training, so here's where the pictures start. So I was a military flight surgeon, and that's a great way to be involved in the military. You are required to fly with your crew and take care of them. I was stationed here in NAS JAX actually. Military crew members, that we have jets, it's really high G's in this environment. There's combat, training operations, and extreme altitude. These were some pictures where we were doing these mock drills where we would save the astronaut at Kennedy Space Center, the astronaut, and then we would go through everything you would do in the helicopter and then take them to the local hospital so they could play too. And I just think it's so crazy looking back, like you had to teach everyone how to just get their helmet off, and then you had to like protect their gear, because in real life, people are gonna steal this from the hospitals because it's so cool. Who wouldn't want an astronaut suit? So funny things you don't think about until you do a drill. So another one you might be familiar with, just TV and mishaps and things, is the FAA and the Department of Transportation. So this is the governing body for civilian aviation in the United States. I was lucky enough to work there a little bit after I completed my training. There are these doctors that can do a course and become what's called an aeromedical examiner. So if there's any pilots in the room, you might have seen one of these doctors, and this is what they have to do to fly. So from the Delta pilot that took you on your last flight to someone flying around in a Cessna, they have to have a medical screen to be able to be the pilot in command, we call it. There's accident investigation, so you might see that too. And this is getting old, but the slide really is just trying to show aviation has gotten safer and safer over time, and we're really lucky that that's because we try to think through a lot of things, not just medically, but every way we can reduce risk. Then of course there's the space agencies, so NASA has been at the center of this forever, but we have all the commercial space agencies, and that's where Dr. Harrison will come in next. This was a centrifuge ride. I got to do the Virgin Galactic protocol of all the G's and everything that it would be. It was pretty cool. And then if you remember that saying where they always say, Houston, we have a problem, they're always talking to the people on the ground, and this is mission control. I got to sit at the surgeon's desk. This was the last flight of the shuttle before it ended, so I was so lucky to get to do that. These are just ideas of space, of NASA flight surgeon duties, all about caring for the astronaut and their unique needs. This would be more fun if I was upside down, but this is a picture of when I was in the Vomit Comet, which is this plane that does these parabolic flights, so you get like just over 20 seconds of weightlessness, and it's used for experiments. So a lot of experiments are going on in that, and I served as one of the backup physicians for when those researchers started to get sick, which happens to the best of us. Just a slide about hyperbaric medicine and what that is. So a lot of training goes on at NASA with the astronauts. This is this giant pool in Houston called the Neutral Buoyancy Lab, or NBL, and it has parts of the ISS underwater. And so this is how the astronauts practice their EVAs, or their spacewalks. There are some airline medical departments that look at both crew and passenger health. Like if you see the little handout in the airplane on the back that says to do some ankle rolls and some calf stretches to avoid a deep vein thrombosis, that is the airline medical department trying to keep you safe. This is a picture of, it was a reduced oxygen mask, so you could understand your effects of hypoxia. And so you do like, kind of math problems and write sentences and things, and you end up getting really silly when you don't have oxygen to your brain. So when you look at that later, you can't believe that that's what you wrote, but that's what you did. And I know we're concentrating on physicians, of course, that's what I know, but there are many roles of non-physicians. This is a team activity. It takes so many people to try to run these programs and keep everybody safe. And then I just had some books and some groups. So this is a group for the aeromedical examiners. And I want to highlight this one before I leave, but there is this group, if you're interested at all, called the Aerospace Medical Association. We call it asthma for short, even though it's not a pulmonary condition. But yeah, asthma is a great resource if you're just interested at all in what you could, how you could be in this field. It's got great pages for students and residents too. And and then this is the club we represent, Andrew. Okay, I'm gonna stop there and let Mike come tell you his story.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. These are not my slides. I don't have slides to present. I'm just going to talk to you about how I got to where I am and what I'm doing right now. So my name is Mike Harrison. I'm currently the Chief Medical Officer at Axiom Space, based in Houston. Still practice at Mayo down the road in the ICU and the emergency room as a physician. And I actually worked a shift today, so I fly in 2 or 3 times a month, work a shift, spend a weekend with the kids, and then go back to Houston. Axiom Space is doing 3 things right now. So you probably heard of SpaceX and the Blue Origins, because they're the ones that are founded by billionaires that tend to get in front of the camera and do things where they tweet stuff in the middle of the night. Axiom's a private company that has got a number of investors and founders, and we're doing 3 things. We're doing private astronaut missions to the International Space Station. You saw the picture of our first crew, AX-1, up there with Larry Connor. And we've done 1 since, and we've got a 3rd launching in 32 days from now. So that's why this facial hair looks like this. Normally I have a beard, but I have to start wearing an N95. So this is compliant. It's not necessarily good looking, but it's compliant. So that's where we're going to go with that. We are also building suits. So the first commercial spacesuit, the next suit that touches the ground on the moon, will be an Axiom suit. So our suit is going to be the Artemis suit that goes back to the moon, and we've actually started putting astronauts in it and pressurizing it. So we saw the demo was revealed internally to us in the MedOps department a year ago, and now we've got astronauts that were hanging from the ceiling in reduced gravity conditions, under pressurized conditions, and making them do what they would have to do on the moon, making them walk on a treadmill, making them use tools, use shovels, things like that. And then the 3rd thing we're doing that we're really excited about is we're building the next space station. So the first commercial space station will be an Axiom station. The first habitat, the first module of it, is expected to fly in 2025, and it should be arriving in Houston in the next few months. It's currently being made in Italy, and it'll be flown over to us. The facility that it's going to go into, we actually cut the ribbon on yesterday, and so we've opened the doors, and we're going to start bringing the pieces over and start manufacturing that. And it's all in-house, so it's going to be a 4-segment space station. It's going to be hanging off the front of the ISS right now, and then when the ISS is decommissioned, We're gonna separate, we'll close the hatch and then we'll separate. Otherwise, it'll be a real short flight. Close the hatch, we'll separate. The ISS will fall into probably the South Pacific, and our station will be the one that's in low Earth orbit. And it's going up there for a number of reasons, right? And so one of the things that I'm gonna talk to you about that I take exception to, and I think Morgan hit it on the head with our crew, right? You hear the term space tourists to describe the crews that are up there, and they're not. So AX-1 went up and they did an awful lot of work and an awful lot of science. They were ambitious with what they were engaged in, and they were doing it in an effort to advance humanity. And the science that we learned from up there can benefit people down here. And the same is continued with our additional missions. And so when we have our station up there, it's not going to be a hotel people go and they hang out on. We're opening it up for commercial enterprise, whether it's manufacturing, because there's a lot of cool stuff that you can manufacture in zero gravity that I knew nothing about until I started at Axiom, right? Because gravity has a big impact on everything. And so if you're trying to put things into a crystal and make a polymer or an alloy or even a pharmaceutical, gravity has an impact on the purity and the composition of that. And if you can remove that from the equation, you've suddenly got something that's pure all the way through, whether it's a drug or something like a piece of steel. And so steel in particular is 4 times stronger when it's made in microgravity as compared to using the exact same ingredients being made here on Earth, just because it's absolutely pure all the way through and uniform. So things like that. But all the way, we've had conversations about a movie mission too, where we're going to shoot a movie on our station and then play it, right? I guess it's not Blockbuster anymore, but wherever kids go to watch movies nowadays. Gives you an idea of how much free time I have. I don't go watch movies.
I'm the director, and I would be glad to direct that movie.
There is a long list. So the actor that's attached to it is coming with the director, but we do train backup, so we can talk about that. So having now babbled for a couple of minutes, it's probably incredibly obvious that I'm Canadian originally, if you picked up on the accent. And so how did I end up here? So I got started as a kinesiologist at the University of New Brunswick, which is on the East Coast. If you follow the 95 all the way till it ends, you're about an hour from where I'm from. So it shares a border with Maine. Did a master's in kines, then did a PhD in kines, and then ended up going to med school in the Caribbean. Small island called Saba. It's a Dutch kingdom now. Used to be part of the Netherlands Antilles. They had a master's of hyperbaric medicine, and as you've seen from some of the other slides, hyperbarics and aerospace medicine are very closely related. And so I knew what I wanted to do early on. I'm a nitrox certified rescue diver as a result of that experience. Ran a hyperbaric chamber down there, which in hindsight was scary as a second-year medical student. I don't think I would recommend that, but at the time it was really cool because I didn't know enough to know that it was a bad idea. Went to Detroit for residency, did a combined emergency medicine, internal and critical care at a major trauma center in Detroit, which is not far off a war zone in certain particular days, months, and neighborhoods. So got a lot of exposure and a lot of experience as a result of that. And then I went to Mayo in Rochester, which is a bit of a culture shock going from urban Detroit to Rochester, Minnesota. But that's where I did my aerospace training. Finished that and came down to Mayo, Jacksonville, very specifically to get into the space industry. And during my, during my fellowship, before COVID started, I started doing contract work for SpaceX as a flight surgeon. So I've supported Demo 1 all the way through to, I think Crew 4 was my last mission with SpaceX. So Demo 1, Demo 2, Crew 1, Crew 2, I-4, Crew 3, and then Crew 4. And then made the transition. So AX-1 was sort of awkward because I was a contractor for SpaceX as well as a contractor for Axiom. And Axiom flies on a SpaceX rocket. So you really had to be careful which badge I was showing you and whose hat I was wearing when I was working. But badge flipped entirely to Axiom after that. Supported Axiom 1 and Axiom 2 and now Axiom 3. And in between all this, I've actually had the opportunity to go support Virgin Galactic as a flight surgeon for VG3. So I went out to New Mexico desert for that. I'll talk to you finally about the missions that we're flying at Axiom and how they're different. Right, Mayo is a fantastic place to work, as Dr. Spiker will attest to, and Morgan will attest to as a student that it's a great spot. I never thought I was leaving, and Axiom managed to pull me away. I wasn't leaving to go work for a company that was going to fly billionaires and only billionaires, and that's what our AX-1 mission was 3 billionaires and a retired NASA astronaut. Because our contract says that we have to have an experienced ISS astronaut on board to supervise crew, right? Make sure that they don't open hatches or push buttons they're not supposed to push. Because that, right, it can go bad. Nobody wants to be the 37th billionaire in space, right? That is a limited customer pool.
I would like to be the first.
I would just like to be a billionaire. But our model is to make space accessible to all. And so one of the things that we've done, and you'll see it, who's familiar with Axiom? Is this the first time a lot of you have heard this word? Yeah, we've got a couple fellow geeks in the room. But Axiom wants to make space accessible to all. And so there's a really cool poster, if you've been to the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., that has 100 years. And so in 1902, we went 100 meters down a beach in North Carolina on the Wright Flyer. In 2002, the ISS became permanently habitated. The people lived in the ISS and have lived there since, starting in 2002. That was 100 years, right? So from that first down the beach in North Carolina, 60 years later, we had boots on the moon. We were flying overseas instead of taking boats on a regular basis. So things happen really quickly in 60 years. We're sort of at the exact same spot for this century right now, right? So I'm excited that my kids are in the back with 3 playing cards, and in the back, you can wave, guys, if you want. They're the ones that are gonna go, right, with their kids to holiday or whatever on, right, Disney, Lunar Disneyland or something. In 60 years, it's gonna be really exciting for them. So we've started to do that. Not every government has a space program, right? NASA in the US, the Canadian Space Agency in Canada, JAXA in Japan, Roscosmos in Russia, and the European Space Agency. Those are the big ones. China's now got one. India's got a space agency. Other countries are starting to form a space agency, but they may not have the rocket to get to space or the infrastructure to get out there. So our second mission, we flew 1 retired astronaut, 1 billionaire who was paying his own way, and then 2 astronauts from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia had sent a male astronaut in the 1980s. They picked 2 males and 2 females, which I was very impressed with for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, that they went with equality. And I'm being serious here. And so they flew the first Saudi female astronaut on our mission. And so now the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a space commission, and they're taking it seriously. They're talking about their next flights. They've got a cadre of 4 astronauts that we helped select, ran them through the training process, and they're starting to establish, right, a plan for recurring flights. They would like to build a habitat on our space station. They want a permanent presence in space. Our next mission, we're flying Turkey, the Republic of Turkey's first astronaut. So we went over and did the same thing with them, did a selection process. We're now training their astronaut. We're going to fly the first one. We've got a backup that we're going to fly on a VG flight later in the year as well. There are other groups like that that are coming out of the woodwork and want to talk to us. There are companies that want to come out, right? Because pharmaceuticals want to build better drugs for us in space, cancer research, things like that. So there's an awful lot of opportunity that's coming with commercial space. So hopefully that's changed some perspective. If you thought that previously it was, right, billionaires going up and they were hanging out for 16 days, floating around, doing somersaults, wearing red noses, and then coming back, that they're actually doing a fair amount of work, and they're doing it in a way that's going to benefit us. And so the challenge of the flight doc is when, and I'm just going to pick a company at random here, right? When 3M or Pfizer comes to us and says, this is the scientist that can do the work, you got to find a way to fly them, and they've got diabetes. Because believe it or not, as prevalent as diabetes is, has never flown to space before. And so things like that, we have to come up with a way to make space accessible to all. Dr. Spiker showed the slide of, right, the physiology and environment. So it used to be how healthy do you have to be to go to space? We're now looking at how sick can you be, and we can still get you to space and do it safely. And there are some challenges that go along with that. So diabetes. ESA just picked an amputee as a backup astronaut during the last selection, right? Amputees have never gone to space before either, and there's been some concerns about how they would do in an emergency situation. Prosthetics have come a long way, and do you really need a prosthetic in microgravity? So commercial space is changing the way that we think about it, and there's an awful lot of challenges that go into that, and it's going to fall on the medical departments to start coming up with some answers for that. So with that, hopefully I haven't rambled too long, bored you too much. I'll turn it back over to Morty.
So, I brought these 2 examples to give you kind of 2 very different stories and tastes of what the field could be. And And hopefully now it kind of inspires you to why we think this field is worth studying and not just for billionaires. Pending any questions, Dr. Hewitt, that's all we have, but we have all three of us available to you. You have Sir, the director.
Mike, you had mentioned hyperbaric chamber, how closely related that is to space. I'd like to know about that, but also like the common things that we know about, blood pressure, or resting heart rate, or culturing of throat swab in space, or the things that we would take for granted. What changes in space? What were like 3 or 5 things that you would say, wow, everything's different when you think about that? So
Yeah.
hyperbaric and space, and then things that you would take for granted in spaces.
So the reason hyperbarics are important is because you're dealing with a change in pressure.
Yeah.
And so anytime you deal with a change in pressure, you run a risk of having some health problems. And so the one that everybody's familiar with is the vents. Right? You go for a dive, you surface too fast, nitrogen bubbles come out of solution, your elbow hurts, or if it's in a bad spot, right, you can't see out of your eye and you're having symptoms that look like a stroke, and we have to take you to a chamber and dive you. That's going from a high pressure environment to a low pressure environment, right? From 30 feet below the sea level to the dive boat on the surface. And then to treat it, we pressurize you again, we shrink the bubble, get it out of solution, and let time do its thing. You do the exact same process, just in a way that you don't necessarily think about doing a spacewalk. You go from a high pressure environment in a space station, which is shirt sleeves, right? You've all seen the pictures of the astronauts that are wearing pants and a t-shirt inside the chamber. But then you're going to a lower pressure environment when you go out the hatch to do a spacewalk. And you're usually going to, right, we're at 14.7 PSI right now. You usually go to about 4 PSI for a spacewalk. And the reason being, right, I can't pressurize a suit at 14.7, but your pose is going to be this. Because you have to work against that pressure to be able to do it. And so you can maybe do it with the big muscle groups, you're not going to be able to do it with your hands. And so they're not going to be able to do the work that they need to. So that's why the shuttle days, you hear about campouts and pre-breathes and exercise protocols, and it was usually done on 100% oxygen to try to offload the nitrogen and change what you've been breathing for a set period of time so that your nitrogen load was as low as possible, so you didn't get the bends when you went out the door to do the spacewalk. So that's what NASA's got a big hyperbaric chamber at the NPL. They do nitrox dives for their NPL dives. And we have hyperbaric chambers on standby whenever we do pressurized testing with our suit at Axiom. And we're relying heavily on our hyperbaric experience and our diving experience in guiding people through what's a good idea and what's a really bad idea for a test protocol. Or what happens if the glove pops off, and what we're going to do. In terms of your second question for what changes?
Yeah, like the stuff that we would take for normal, you know, like put a blood pressure cuff and take up blood pressure, or draw blood, or you know, how does resting heart rate change, or even you say that you take a look at astronauts over time. Do the astronauts that have been up there for an extended period of times, are they in protocols where they have to come in every 6 months and, you know, be measured and say what's changed that's out of the ordinary for this age, that type of thing? So what changes?
Okay, I'll do some of it, because this is years of study, what you're asking.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things to think about how the human physiology changes that we have evolved in a 1G environment, right? And so gravity is always pulling us down, and we have a differential pressure, say, in our brains than in our feet. When you go to space, you're all neutral, so your blood supply isn't going to have this differentiation, so everything's the same. So one of the things you can see in astronauts, if you look closely, they all look really poofy and swollen in space. And the blood is more in their heads than it is at this 1G environment, because everything is even, right? So they get pretty bad sinus pressure, they get congested, they get kind of swollen like that. And that definitely changes your fluid balance, so you have a big fluid offloading. And then when you get home, a lot of them are very dehydrated. They try to fluid load on the way back, but something you might have seen is you always see them like kind of sitting up and smiling and waving, but everybody's down and they have like the blanket on them. It's because it's so hard to go against gravity when you get back, because it's gonna take the body a minute to re-regulate the fluid shifts, you know? There are these sensors that kind of regulate that, and they're just not used to it.
Yeah.
So there's a big reconditioning program that goes on for all the astronauts that stay at the ISS for, 6 months to a year kind of thing. That it takes them months to get their balance back, their proprioception, get everything working. So, I mean, that's a general answer, but that's something that's immediate. And then there's the bone and muscle health is another big field of study. And then one of the things, and there are things we can study up at the ISS and things we study when we get back. But like the question that you were asking about what they follow up in space, there's a lot of vision changes that
Vision.
happen. Yeah, and so they have these glasses that you can actually like adjust. So during their space flight, they might have a new prescription, and they're studying the different pressures on the optic nerve and what
But you
that
can't brand the
does.
glass in space, so you have to have something that's, changeable.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
The lens changes. It's pretty cool. So that's something that happens during space. And then you were just asking questions about how you monitor. I don't know a great answer to all that immediately, but I think something very interesting to think about is in space is the closed environment. So every time there's like a droplet of blood, talk about hazardous waste.
Right.
It can go anywhere, in anybody, on anybody. So you have to have very specific ways that you do everything and carry out emergency codes and whatever might happen. It's
Right.
really interesting to think about that with the commercial space participants too. If one of them gets sick, how is that going to affect everybody else on
Yeah.
that flight?
Right.
So we definitely are thinking about those
Those
things
environment,
too.
sure, yeah. I withdraw my request to the 37.
So one of the other things that I was responsible for early, because I started my space career just before, my operational space career, just before COVID, and then continued we didn't break cadence. Crew, Demo 2, Crew 1, Crew 2, Crew 3, all launched on schedule as they were supposed to during the pandemic. And COVID has never been the ISS. Find some wood quick, because I'm sending the next ones, and yeah. But the things that we were discussing, so I was the only critical care doctor in the room at NASA having conversations about, and I was also the only one in the room that had treated a COVID patient at that point early on. And so things that you talk about that we were doing for COVID here on Earth, we were proning patients, right? You flip them over to use gravity to move the fluid to the smaller sections along the front and to aerate the big sections in the back. How do you prone somebody in space?
Yeah,
Right?
right.
You don't have gravity that you're using to your advantage. So things like that we would, and this is just an example, but if you look at that for pretty much any medical procedure, the way you do it down here isn't going to be the way that you're going to do it step by step up there. There's going to be something that you're like, oh yeah, that needed gravity, right? Med's in a vial before you can draw it up. It's just surface tension keeps it together. So it would be a fluid medicine thing at the bottom of the bottle. You flip the bottle upside down, you put the needle in, you draw the medicine up, and you throw the bottle away. Now you're doing gymnastics with that needle, trying to get it into the ball of stuff that's somewhere inside the bottle that,
Right.
You've got to spin it to try to get centrifugal force to get it to go to where you want.
Right.
Even the 6-foot rule that we had for COVID, right? You must be 6 feet away from people because we expect the droplet is going to fall after 6 feet. In zero gravity, it's going until Newton says it's hit a wall. And that'll be where it stops. So just things like that you take for granted down here. Megan MacArthur was the pilot for Crew 2, and she said it best. So things down here that you take for granted, you really have to think about up there, and you have to think, how do I do this without making a mess? And she goes, that goes all the way down to brushing my teeth.
We had a question there, sir? Yep.
Yes, you mentioned in your presentation that it's affecting the gravity may affect the heart. Does affecting it in a way that is going to be benefit or against that? Like if somebody needs a sperm or has a sperm or have a low heart problems and stuff like that, is it going to be bad for them or is it going to be any benefit to go into space?
So you've asked a question that I don't know if we have the scope of information to give a definitive answer, but I can tell you there are certain things that we learn in medical training about the coagulability of blood, for example, and where it amasses. When we talk about the edema, that kind of like puffing up, some people get that in their feet here on Earth with heart failure.
Yeah.
But someone up at 0G is getting it all over their body. Probably not a good thing. Probably higher risk for stroke. These are a lot of probablys. Could there be a possibility that someone in some ideal situation might benefit from lower systolic heart pressure? It's possible, but I don't know if we can say it definitively, right? Not a, you're at more risk than you are benefit. I think that's kind of
So you cannot make any kind like a procedure to help anybody in the space for that. It is going
We
different
can
way.
think maybe some things will get better in space, like how we grow stem cells, for example.
Okay.
They grow all around instead of on a flat space. So that is the research realm, actually. I love your question. I wish I could tell you, but so far, the vast majority of our years in space has been this like really excellent screening to get the right people in space. And so we really haven't had like, that has been published.
So whoever you work,
No.
so whoever is working to go to space has to be working to make a strength the heart.
Well, so
and all
that
the
was
things.
part of what their discussion was. Historically, we've screened people so that they are athletic, military grade type people going to space so they can deal with the ardor of space. Now we're kind of edging a little bit towards like, what if they
The
have
tourists, that's what I'm going with.
diabetes or something?
So
that's
now that you
possible.
got tourists, how you check, because I see that some of them are already in age just because they got enough money to go, but they have a high age. When they have also the health down, it's coming with age.
So you've hit on something that's really interesting because there's a joke in the medical community,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure how funny it'll be for the rest of you, but it's funny to us. Well, at times it's funny to us. And every now and then, like all jokes get a little close to reality. The joke is there are no medical standards for a commercial astronaut except for the wallet biopsy, right? So if your wallet survives the biopsy and the check doesn't bounce, somebody will fly you to space. That's good and it's bad because, right, the government intentionally didn't regulate medical conditions that couldn't fly into space and what the standards are because they didn't want to stifle innovation and opportunity. And so they've left it up to the companies to come up with what are you comfortable flying and how are you going to do it? And right, with a lot of freedom comes a lot of responsibility. And it's something at Axiom that we take very seriously because there's the other thing that drives me nuts is when I'm talking to colleagues in the field and I keep saying when something happens. And they're like, well, if. There is not a single mode of transportation that we have invented as a human species that has not ended in an accident somewhere where somebody's had to go to the emergency room. And as an ER doctor, I like that job security. As a medical director for a commercial space company, I don't like that idea. So I don't want it to be us first. And so we're hard at work for the our standards of what we'll fly, how we'll fly it. And the nice thing about being a commercial company, not a government company, is there's a lot of freedom for how we go about flying certain things. So if somebody has a medical condition, I can work with the engineers and I can work with the whatever other team I need to, and we can actually come up with a cost of you can go to space with condition X, but here are the factors that I'm gonna have to do to mitigate it, right? We're gonna have to design a new suit, we're gonna have to design a new chair, you may have to take a physician with you, which I'm a big advocate of that particular route for obvious reasons, but like, then we're gonna do what every commercial company does, right? When tomatoes get more expensive, your Wendy's hamburger gets more expensive, right? If your seat to go to space gets more expensive, and you're the consumer, we will pass that cost on you. So we're not saying no, but we're actually able to say that this is, right, we can nimbly respond to your request, we can come up with some innovative solutions, but there's gonna be a cost that goes along with it. And the hope is that some of these things we'll then be able to use, right, to Morgan's point, to benefit back here, that we'll learn something about how to optimize the diabetic for a 6-month mission in space so that the diabetics down here don't end up in DKA and in the ICU or right, coming to visit Lee in clinic for some sort of unexpected consequence of their condition. You can pick any condition, but that's the goal. Does that make sense?
A lot.
Sir?
Just a quick question. So I'm just curious because in simulating artificial gravity in space, right? Does that help with reducing some of the symptoms that you see in astronauts and
So that is why they spend, I think isn't it like 180 minutes a day exercising? It's something crazy like that.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, doing resistive exercise, and the whole idea is to try to decrease bone density loss. But I mean, your bigger question is, as some companies are coming up with space stations, are we ever gonna have a whole station that simulates artificial gravity? And if you can overcome the cost, I think it would be a really interesting idea. Be cool.
It's a fascinating concept, and when you do the math of how big the radius has to be for that station to spin, and to spin in a way that is not going to induce nausea, right? To get to, right, the bigger the circle, the slower the angular velocity to get that pull at the further point. But then as you start coming in on that circle, right, you're gonna start getting reduced loads of gravity. So everybody would either have to live and work outside, or you would have to come up with, right, what's acceptable. Is 2 hours at a 1G environment acceptable, and you can live and work somewhere in between? Or I'm trying to remember which of Andy Weir's books it is, where, right, there's sort of a slum area, where, right, the people are, the lower tier workers are living, and the higher, yeah, right.
I had you first.
I have 2 questions, sorry.
Is this okay, Dr. Hewitt? Are we good?
Yeah, I think if people want to go, that's fine. And maybe in like 5 or 10 minutes, we'll take a break, and people can ask you questions. Maybe.
I'm trying to read your eyes.
Yeah.
Yes, please go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry. My 2 questions were, one, was there specific like research or rotation, like all you guys did to like get into the program to get into aerospace medicine? And then the second question might be hard to answer, but like what would like a day in the life of like an aerospace physician be like? I know it probably changes a lot, but like in general.
For me, it was military. I got me on the path.
So I gave somebody career advice last night, and it wasn't very good. It was sort of close your eyes, hold on tight, hope you stick the landing. Sort of how I figure